Simone. Today, occasionally I will go down a rabbit hole and I'll be like, this is something I really wish I could find a good, succinct video on because now it's a topic that interests me. And this topic is the Harambe of pronatalism, Shinzo Abe. I have just seen so many pronatalist Shinzo Abe memes of him trying to promote fertility. And then after the recent thing happened, which we'll go into, where people in Japan became convinced that Shinzo Abe from the dead had told Trump to move to avoid being assassinated. And it's just amazing. So first, I'm going to bring the audience along with me on a journey through some memes about Shinzo Abe. Then we're going to go into who he actually was. Like, what did he accomplish in his life? How pronatalist was he really? Okay. And then we're going to go into the assassination. And then we're going to go into what led to the assassination.
All right, then.
So we're starting with meme number 1 of Shinzo Abe here, which is him holding a gun out. And what does it say, Simone?
It says, "Stop watching VTubers, you stinky neats. Do your duty, have sex. I'm no longer asking." I love this.
The next one I love, and this is something that as I first started like going into Shinzo Abe, I really realized how well liked he was within like meme community. So here's one that's a political compass that shows a former Japanese PM Shinzo Abe shot dead. And it shows people on all sides of the political compass sad about this. But then the next political compass one, which I think is more true, shows everybody horrified except for the authoritarian lefties who are, hooray, death to Japan, I'm coming, it says. And it shows from China News, like from one of their main sources. Uh-huh. And all of the, far commies, they're being like, don't be stunned, celebrate, stuff like that. So horrified. But I think what this shows is that the only people who were really happy that he died was the crazy, like, pro-China people, which again, if you're not pro-China, should make you love him even more. And this was something that a lot of people were saying in the analysis of him that made me want to learn more about him, is that one, longest serving PM in the history, I think, of Japan. So very, very popular person. And people were like, they don't understand, like, Japan losing him, and some of the analysis I saw, they said could significantly hurt the country because he was so effective at everything he did. For the next meme here, this takes place in the Frin universe, and it starts with the character saying,
"Elves may live a long time.
Oh, that's good.
But across the board, we lack romantic feelings and reproductive instincts.
Wait, hold on.
We're quietly going extinct."
Huh?
Last time I met a fellow elf was more than 400 years ago.
Sigh.
Perhaps we're closer to the end than I thought.
We're too late this time. You doing a girl voice, by the way, is so out of character for you. Here, do the next meme.
Well, I read that a boy and a girl can create new life by joining their bodies together. It shows
Shinzo Abe smiling in the
background. He's like, yes.
And then this one, it's Korobo and Mitsubo are having their fourth. And then it shows Shinzo Abe, my job here is done. And then this is one of my favorite, where this was after the assassination, and it shows a picture of like the scenery of Japan with Shinzo Abe's face fading out. And it just says, have sex in big letters. And then on the bottom right, it says, see ya, space cowboy.
Which was the outro from Cowboy Bebop.
Yes, which was really got to me. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the really funny thing that happened. Well, not funny, but I guess touching. And there's memes about like women like, I cry at the Titanic, men don't cry over anything. And it shows the men like crying over memes of Abe protecting Trump from the assassination. But this makes sense. They did have a very, very strong relationship. And we'll get into why this was the case in just a second. But here in a Japanese Twitter post, it says, during his speech, Trump heard Shinzo Abe's voice calling him to attention in his ear. When he tilted his head to listen to the voice, he heard the sound of a bullet cutting through the air, and the bullet penetrated Trump's right ear, and he heard a gunshot. If Trump had not tried to listen to Abe's voice, he would have been killed by the bullet. And for people who are like, wait, why would a lot of people in Japan actually believe this? Well, a big group that liked Shinzo Abe was extremist Christians, specifically the Unification Church, specifically the Moonies, who would have believed something like this was possible. And people were memeing about this in the West, and they thought it was serious.
Well, apparently that was why Shinzo Abe was shot, right? It was the guy who shot him was
Yeah, it was the Unification Church, which we'll
was
get to.
against the church.
And
Yeah.
I mean, in light of all these memes, you can think, oh, these memes are so silly, etc. One of my favorites has always been the what I watched, which it shows Frank's, and it goes what I expected, which is Gurren Lagann, and then it's a gif of what I got. It's Shinzo Abe's face pointing at the screen, and occasionally it flashes, have sex. My very favorite Shinzo Abe meme I found after we recorded this episode. It shows a post from our Reddit Witches versus the Patriarchy. Some other witches have mentioned that doing spells directly against Trump are not as effective as we might hope, as he seems to have some kind of protection around him. And then they wrote, quote unquote, some kind of protection around him, and it shows Shinzo Abe's face in the background. And here's a great one, which is a political compass one, which shows why Shinzo Abe was so well liked. It shows, people being shocked at his death, and it shows people at every side of the political compass sad, but it shows why they're sad. So the authoritarian left, he oversaw a 15% real increase in minimum wage while dropping unemployment to under 3%. That was lefty authoritarian. Righty authoritarian, he worked to ensure Japan could stand with America and protect democracy in Taiwan when the day comes. And then because he rebuilt Japan's military. And then at the libertarian right, it just shows the economy going up under his leadership. And then in the libertarian left, it shows his policies opened the door to ensure millions of women were able to join the workforce. And I just think that that's really cool. This guy who is so universally liked. And I wanted to understand, and I will say that when I dug on him deeper, I didn't necessarily come away universally liking him.
Interesting. Well, that's what I was just going to ask you. Was he universally liked because he was shot? Because he was assassinated?
No, it was universally liked before that. But unfortunately, his reputation took a hit in the investigation of the person who shot him, because the person who shot him he didn't have no point.
Like he should have written a sternly worded letter. You're saying maybe
he should have written a sternly worded letter, but Shinzo Abe may have facilitated a cult that destroyed a lot of people's lives and used the cult to stay in power.
The movies, really?
Yes. Now, whether you consider it a cult or a religion, I mean, it could be like people saying, well, you guys do the same with, like, I don't know, being overly positive about Mormons, people who are like really anti-Mormon and think of it as a cult. And I'd be like, one, I don't think we're that overly positive Mormon, but like if they became like a major voting block for us and we were running and then they blamed us, like I could see, I don't know. Because I don't think the Unification Church is a much more culty cult than the Mormons, but we'll get into them in a second.
Yeah, well, then it would have to be if Tom Cruise was president, but then someone assassinated him because
he wasn't in the Unification Church.
I know. Oh, he wasn't? Oh, okay.
No, the Unification Church. Okay, so I'll go quickly into this right now.
Please, yes. I don't know this story.
Before he was ever in his party, actually during the age of his dad, who helped the Unification Church a lot get established in Japan, they began
to South Korean, right?
Yeah, which is a South Korean cult or religion. Okay. They began to help the party a lot with local organizational stuff. And when he took over the party, he didn't like clear them out of the party. And they still had a big role in helping with, like flyers and door knocking and all of that in a very, very big way. And people think that the party wouldn't have as much power as they had if they didn't have this free resource of human labor. Okay. So his pronatalist initiatives. So Womanomics in 2013, Abe called for a society in which all women can shine, setting a target that 30% of leadership positions should be held by women by 2020. This was a conservative, by the way. This policy aimed to increase women's participation in the workforce, which Abe believed could potentially improve both Japan's GDP and fertility rate. And so right away, when we've gone into other countries' fertility rates and we've like laughed at their like extended maternity leave and stuff like that.
Yeah, and he's like, get them to work.
This is the first time I've heard one where I'm like, one, counterintuitive, and two, probably right. Yeah. And I will note, what is Shinzo Abe's legacy? The by far highest fertility rate in the region is Japan. So I mean, he was kind of right. Yeah, women working does help fertility rates. Childcare expansion, Abe planned to spend 2 trillion yen, approximately 17.6 billion, on education and childcare. This included promises of free preschool for children aged 3 to 5, free childcare for children age 2 and younger from low-income households. He
Wow.
did labor reforms. He attempted to break down Japan's two-tier employment system, which often excluded temporary workers from the regular workforce. These reforms were aimed at creating a more flexible labor market that could better accommodate working parents. And then Abenomics and Abenomics 2.0 in September 2015. The first one was called Abenomics. This is Abenomics 2.0. Abe announced an updated platform that centered on raising the birth rate and expanding Social Security. This included creating new cabinet positions dedicated to reversing Japanese demographic decline.
Abe, huh?
Now, a lot of people think that he sponsored anime that had pronatalist themes.
Right.
This is,
And I have
not-
wondered that when we've watched recently released anime. I don't know if you only watch prenatalist anime shows or if
No,
it's
I mean,
just a
the
thing.
studio that did, for example, Frank's, which is seen as having hugely pronatalist message.
Yeah, I'm gonna find another female partner.
Fine then! What? You think in the real world your perfect girl will just come falling out of the sky? Hey, you wanna help me bang this robot?
You mean pilot this robot?
I know what I said. Whatever! Time to fight some monsters!
So no one besides me thinks this control scheme's a bit weird.
Why would anything about this be weird? Now spank me hard and I'll shout out Daddy to get the engine started.
Does anyone not have a partner to ride?
They're not.
You see, I've always thought of you as a brother.
You mean like the normal kind or the anime kind?
The anime kind.
Oh, ew! Don't you have anyone else that likes you anyway?
Well, now that you mention it.
I do! I wanna make a baby!
How do we do that? That was amazing!
Yeah! And now you can look forward to paying a lifetime's worth of child support!
What's child support?
I'd like to declare that we're getting married!
Is also the studio that did Gurren Lagann, which came out a long time before anyone was freaking out about demographic collapse.
And
It had
Gurren
an
Lagann's very
extremely pronatalist
anti-natalist.
message, or at least an anti.
But wasn't, I mean, Gurren Lagann was.
well, that was
was
Gurren
that-
Lagann that I'm talking about. It was the same team.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, Gurren Lagann is, yeah, but no, sorry, but they were also Evangelion, which is anti-natalist. And Evangelion was pre-Abe. I think Gurren Lagann, did that overlap with Shinzo
That was
Abe?
pre-Abe.
So I was wrong on this one. Shinzo Abe first served as Prime Minister of Japan in 2006 to 2007, then again from 2012 to 2020. Well, his 2006 to 2007 run, that is when Gurren Lagann was released. Gurren Lagann was released in 2007. Not that there is any chance that he influenced its development, but yeah, Simone was right on this one, weirdly.
Yeah.
Gurren Lagann's old, and then they
Gurren
did
Lagann's
a like other pronatalist anime that I've shown on here, like the one about old people and stuff like that. It's not that the Japanese government never sponsors anime or manga, but they're typically one-off projects and not full series. And it was doing that before Abe, and it doesn't appear that there's any documented evidence of like super pronatalist stuff being pushed. It appears that most of the pronatalist anime was just created because people love their country and love their culture. And I think that shows in part why Japan has been more resistant to fertility collapse than other countries in the region, is that there's just much more pride in the Japanese identity than there is, and as somebody who's spent time in Japan and Korea, for example, there is simply more pride in the Japanese identity than there is in the Korean identity. And I suspect it's, people just pushing this into their own media in an attempt to save their culture. And I think it's sad that we don't see more of this in US media. But I think it's because in US media, there's very few actual conservatives, because the far left and the urban monoculture sort of acts as a cabal, keeping them out of positions. Whereas in Japan, you don't have the same extent of conservatives just not appearing in media, which didn't used to be as extreme in the US as it is today. Now, let's talk about other big things he did. Constitutional reinterpretation. In 2014, Abe's government reinterpreted Article 9 of Japan's pacifist constitution to allow for collectivist self-defense, enabling Japan to come to the aid of its allies under attack. Now, this is really big. He really began to turn Japan into a military power again, to put it on a military footing. And I think that as an American, this is something I am really glad that he did, because he also pretty much unilaterally rebuilt Quad, or the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which is an alliance between Japan, US, India, and Australia. And if you're wondering, who would those four countries be allied against? Specifically, this would be against China. They would really only kick into action against China, but it would be incredibly damaging to China, especially if you had the US and Japan plus Australia and India involved in any sort of a boycott, because China imports around, I think last I checked was 83% of their energy needs, and something like 86% of that is coming through the Strait of Malacca, which basically means past India. So like there's very little they could do. They could take it into the deep ocean, but then they need to go all the way around Australia. But if you go all the way around Australia, well, now you need to get through the island chain that Japan and the US control. So there's really no way to supply China by water if there was ever a blockade and the Quadrilateral Alliance was at play. And he increased military spending to 1 to 2% of GDP. And he also pushed through controversial security laws that allowed the Japanese Self-Defense Force to deploy overseas and engage in combat to defend allies when it used to be defense only. And the ally in contest here is very obviously Taiwan. Any thoughts before I go further, Simone? Will you like this guy so far, or he's sounding...
I mean, for any elected politician, he sounds pretty solid. And also just the fact that he made some pretty meaningful changes too.
Mm-hmm. No, in terms of
he's a man
policy,
of action.
Yeah, he's one of those characters where like the way he got elected may have been shady, but as a politician, he was God tier and really only did good. A good example of this in the United States would be Nixon. And Nixon is generally considered one of the best presidents in American history by people who like know their presidential history stuff. Building our current relationship with China and building globalization was really important in securing peace and making America as prosperous today as it is. However, he did cheat in an election cycle. Well, basically cheated. And to give you an idea of how well liked Nixon is in the US, Stephen Colbert, far lefty Stephen Colbert, he said that out of all American presidents, Nixon is his favorite. So that should show you that he really does appeal across the aisle. So another thing to note here is he did a very good job building a relationship with Trump. And he had a close personal friendship with Trump from what we've seen, with Trump saying after he died, something along the lines of, no one will ever understand how much Japan has lost, with Abe's passing. Like he knew more from his position to know just how important he was, which is probably true. From the position of president of the US, you have more information than other people have.
Well, but I think Abe also demonstrated the first time Trump flew out to have a major meeting with him, just how much he wanted to invest in a good relationship with Trump. And that, what did they do? First thing after they land, go golfing. What did they do? They eat American beef burgers. He had special hats made that played on the Make America Great Again slogan, but it had something to do with like their partnership.
Yes, and he gave Trump a golf cart. That was the gift that he gave to him. And he was the first person to call Trump of world leaders. And Abe appeared to genuinely like golfing as well. So, Trump always loves just golfing all the time.
I figure like Trump really works well for the Japanese mindset because he's a larger than life character, and they really like characters that ham, how do you use the term? Ham
I love it. He also gave Trump a gold colored driver.
That's perfect. But see, he gets it. He gets Trump, and he spoke with Trump in Trump words. And that is,
and he kept the meetings private, which was another thing that he did to build. People were always trying to, like, Trump's foreign policy team was always trying to protect him from forming too close a personal relationship with people, because that's what he would always go for. He'd get their personal phone numbers. He'd just call them up.
Yeah. In H.R. McMaster's biography or autobiography, he keeps talking about how Trump would say things like, stop by the White House. And everyone's freaking out like, no, that doesn't mean you've just received an official foreign visit invite. And he'd be like, here's my number. Like, he'd just give people his cell phone number, and they'd freak out about that too, because they needed to monitor all the calls or something.
He also didn't. One of the interesting things is, how Trump loved trying to play like hardball with these deals that he would make with countries.
Yeah.
Japan didn't really push back and basically took one of Trump's like fairly one-sided deals to flatter his ego, which was probably the right thing to do.
That's also so Japanese. Like, it is the proper thing to do at this point. Out of courtesy, we will do this.
Well, I mean, I think it showed an understanding of Japan's relation with the United States today and the importance on having it be incredibly strong. And that is what he was able to accomplish. Now, the downside with Trump is one of Shinzo Abe's things was the TPP, and Trump did still torpedo that. So he wasn't like always going along with what Abe wanted. But
Yeah.
broadly speaking, oh, by the way, for people who don't know my thoughts on the TPP, I actually think Trump's torpedoing the TPP turned out for the best. And a lot of
Why is
people are
that?
very surprised by this because they're like, oh no, it was an Obama era thing that could have like built this great relationship and caused us to be an economic superpower in the region. But it was very, very, very heavy handed.
In what way? It was just bloated regulation or something? In what way was it?
Yeah, IP regulations. A lot of it was like Hollywood lobbying to try to make the IP regulations super strong around pirated stuff and things like that.
Lame.
And it led to something that could have. So let's see, because we do know what happened post TPP blowing up, and we can talk about what ended up happening in the region. Post TPP blowing up, China at first looked like they had gained all of the strengths. They started really forming a tight relationship with the Philippines. They started really fixing relationships with Vietnam. They started really expanding their influence. Well, then what happened? Because the US wasn't there to act as a counter influence, China immediately began to overplay their hand massively and began to really push this 9-dot line thing. Basically just claiming huge swaths of territory from like the Philippines and Vietnam and all of the people who they had just made friends with, and then began to basically threaten Taiwan. Well, what did this do is it basically pissed off that basically because we didn't have this economic fenced-in area in the region, China immediately overplayed their hand and turned the Philippines right now has an extremely pro-US head who grew up in Hawaii. You know, the Vietnam is becoming increasingly pro-US to the point where both countries, I guess you could say, are basically in our pocket at this point. Same with the only country they've really made any headway was this maybe South Korea, but not even really there. And Japan has become increasingly pro-US because they don't like the moves that China is making around Taiwan. Basically, it ended up making the entire geopolitical region extremely strong allies of the United States from goading China into overplaying their hand with economic sanctions and land grabs. But I think that here you see, like with the Trump thing, just an incredible amount of strategy and charisma in terms of building the relations he needed to build. Now, let's talk about the assassination, because this is something. Anything you want to talk about before we get to the assassination?
No, let's dive into it.
Shinzo Abe was shot twice from behind with a homemade shotgun while giving a campaign speech near Yamato Saidaija Station, Nara, Japan. The attack occurred around 11:30, hitting Abe in the chest and neck. Despite being rushed to a local hospital, Abe was pronounced dead at 5 o'clock, just 5 hours after the shooting. So the gun that was used was like a homemade thing that he learned to put together actually from YouTube videos. And people said even somebody without a lot of knowledge could learn to make one of these. It used a battery for the ignition and some wires attached to the battery, and then 2 tubes for the barrels, and likely some sort of bought propellant in the region or something like that. It was all over the table, showing the factlessness of laws against guns and the complacency it can cause. The suspect, the shooter identified as Tetsu Yamanagi, was immediately arrested at the scene. Yamanagi is a 41-year-old former member of the Maritime Self-Defense Force, admitted to shooting after his arrest. He was formally charged with the murder, violating gun control laws. And his motive was that his mom had donated tons of money to the Moonies, or the Unification Church, and this led to his family being in poverty and his brother's unaliving himself.
Oh my
So he blamed all this. Well, I mean, cults could do this. They can be incredibly like, we're going to take all your money, we're going to take everything you own, we don't care about you at all. And
Sure.
the Moonies as a community are kind of known for that. In the United States, by the way, if you don't know who the Moonies are, if you've ever seen a cult in like a 70s movie or stereotype where everybody went to work at a plantation and then was like tricked and kept hostage, those were Moonies. That was what the Moonies were famous for, was these big plantations where like yuppie college kids would go thinking like, oh, I'm gonna learn to live off the land. And then they'd spend extremely long hours working fields. They would be sleep deprived. And when they weren't doing that, they were exposed to constant messaging.
Wow.
Are you familiar with these cults? Like, did you hear about them or?
I'm not. I think in media I've seen references to creepy cults that involve agricultural work, but I didn't know that was Mooney's thing. So
Yeah, it was a Mooney's thing. They don't do that as much anymore. They do other things now, but there is still an incredibly high demand religion. The Unification Church's relationship with the Japanese conservative politicians dates back to the 1960s when Abe's grandfather, former Prime Minister Nobuke Keisha, helped the church establish itself in Japan. This connection was based on shared anti-communist ideologies during the Cold War. The Unification Church provided valuable political support to LDP politicians. This was the party of Abe. Dispatching believers to volunteer in election campaigns, mediating organizational votes for LDP candidates, and providing a volunteer army of campaign workers. In return, many LDP lawmakers, including Abe, gave speeches at church meetings and related organizations, effectively acting as promoters of the church. The scale of the church's influence in Japanese politics was revealed after Abe's assassination. Almost half of the LDP's 379 Diet members, Congress members basically, admitted to some form of contact with the Unification Church. At least 180 of 379 LDP lawmakers in Japan's National Diet were found to have ties with the church. 23 of 54 members appointed as vice ministers and parliamentary secretaries in second Kishida cabinet had connections to the church. So 23 out of 53. So a lot. Yamaniga alluded to the assassination before the incident, posting on his blog, Mr. Abe was one of the most influential Unification Church sympathizers. And yeah. Now, what about Abe's role? Abe was alleged to have overseen LDP's relationship with the Unification Church, using it to help the party win office. And yeah.
That just sounds like they were a major donor block and he treated them like he would treat any other major donor block. That's
basically
here?
I don't feel like he did anything wrong. Like, even as a politician, would I have done that? If a religion, like suppose like Jehovah's Witnesses, I think Jehovah's Witnesses do some shady things, but like if I became the presidential candidate for like the US Republican Party and the Jehovah's Witnesses were like always behind me 100%, am I going to advocate for their policy positions? Yeah, I mean, that's called a democracy, right?
Well, but yeah, that's what happens with politicians and unions, with politicians and corporations, with politicians and any big supporter.
Absolutely, yeah. And people think that they might be influencing the policy that his government did, specifically that Japanese still hasn't legalized same-sex marriage, could be downstream of this church. But I mean, come on, the Mormons have pushed for that in the US for a long time, right? Like, and I don't think that somebody deserves to be assassinated over that. And the church's name change to the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification in 2015 was approved by the government during Abe's tenure. And this is why, by the way, was our
like name change. Wait, why is that notable?
Oh, I think a normal government would have said, we're not going to call you the Organization for World Peace and Unification. But I think that also when people look at our religious beliefs and the unique religion we're creating, one of the things I really appreciate about it is that it isn't pro-unification, which sounds really nice on paper. World peace and unification. You know, the Baha'is are also about this, and they think that like we have similarities to them. I'm like, no.
No, I just think of unity from Rick and Morty. Unification is not.
It's not a good thing.
Then I found this world
where I was better able to focus on my passion for unification.
You mean stealing people's bodies?
Summer, rude.
This world will be invited into the Galactic Federation.
From there, I'll have access to countless planets and species.
One by one, I will unify them, and I will be what the single-minded once called a god.
Oh, that's pretty sexy. Where can we get a drink around here?
Recreational substances were phased out here. There's no need for escape from the self when your world is one.
Unity. Who am I talking to?
No, it's not. It's a creepy thing. It's a pod person thing. It's a homogenizing thing. We do not want unification.
But I will say that also, if I get myself in the mind of the assassin, right?
Oh.
So think about him. You know, you grow up, your brother has unalived themselves, your family grew up in poverty, you feel like they were scammed out of everything. And who do you blame the most? You know that the Unification Church played a large role in this. Mm-hmm. And then you can ask, well, who has done the most to aid the Unification Church's agenda in the country?
Hardly, though. No. He needs to blame the members of the church who give the church the money, who donate to political campaigns. This is in the hands of the church itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
He made it wrong. He shot the wrong guy. Abe should be with us here today.
Very sad, very much Harambe situation. of pronatalism. I really like that he has been seen as sort of the face of pronatalism because the memes are really sweet. I would say like they do a good job of conveying a positive sentiment in a way where, like, suppose we became the meme face of pronatalism. We're known as like the pronatalist people who speak on the topic all the time, but we've never had many memes of us around pronatalism. And I really appreciate that because I think they'd come off like the Eliezer memes around AI apocalypticism.
Are there Eliezer memes around AI
There's lots of him being
apocalypticism?
like, they just make the movement look like deranged and like a bunch of fat neckbeards. Whereas Abe comes across as very sincere and worried about his people.
That's how they chose to frame them. They could have framed him very differently, but they chose to frame him that way.
Well, any final thoughts, Simone?
Japan is great. Isn't it great? I love Japan.
People who don't know, she was born in Japan and her middle name is Haruko because she was named after, well, being born in Japan.
Named after being... Yeah, we don't want to go into why Haruko's my name.
Hey, there's a lot of great anime characters with the name Haruko.
Just from Fooly Cooly. Wait, who else is named Haruko?
The character from the show where, I'm pretty sure it's this one, where the main character is a god. It's a really interesting show, actually. So the main character is a female girl who is a god, and she doesn't know she's a god. But she creates the world around her and the world that everyone is in.
Oh no.
And so
so she's living in the simulation.
She's living in a simulation that she's creating around herself.
Oh no.
Of being a high school character.
Oh,
What's interesting about the show is that her best friends who are created as members of the simulation begin to realize this as the show goes on, and they begin to realize how dangerous their situation is. Like, if she gets on to some conspiracy, that conspiracy will start happening. Like, if she gets into anime girls and anime girls start appearing, if she thinks that there's like robots replacing people, robots start replacing people. And so like one of her friends will turn out to be a robot or something like that. And so her friends have to constantly guard this girl who is otherwise very much, I almost want to say like a manic pixie dream girl type character, like change her hair color every day, like really wants to believe all these crazy things. They have to constantly be trying to ground her because if they don't, it fundamentally breaks the nature of their reality.
Maybe this isn't the old world anymore. Maybe this world is a new one that Haruhi created. And if that's the case, how would I go about confirming it?
That's, man. Why are anime plots so
anime.
fun?
I don't like it, but it's a classic.
I feel like with anime and manga, they nail the premise, they nail the aesthetics, and then execution is 25 to 30% of the time okay. 7% of the time, god tier. But the rest,
I'm actually gonna maybe be controversial here, but I think with anime, what I've noticed is almost always when the theme and ideas are interesting, the execution is mid. When the theme and ideas are boring, the execution is really good.
Okay, let's play this out.
Well, here's examples.
Like Food Wars. Food Wars, which is one of our favorites. Pretty lame concept.
Yeah, excellent.
Pretty amazing. Yeah.
Something like Darling with Franks, which I think is a really interesting concept in mid-execution. Deers, which I mentioned before, is a really interesting anime, mid-execution. Like, yeah, usually when the ideas are good, Goblin Slayer, right? Actually kind of a boring concept.
What about the one that you really like that's depressing with that everyone's very smart?
Grandma and Grandpa Turn Young Again. Again, very
boring, but great execution.
And the one that you're thinking of is Code Geass.
Yes.
Code Geass might be one of the rare instances of, well, okay. I'd say Code Geass is interesting, very interesting ideas, okay execution, but I wouldn't say it's like, in terms of like execution and flow of a show, one of the better shows I've seen, where I just like love all the characters or anything like that. If anything, it just like holds me kind of. Oh, here's another example. God tier execution would be High School of the Dead. Very mid theme, generic zombie world.
Yeah. Yeah, you would think, what's the point? Okay, well then, so you kind of get Japanese culture. You've traveled a little bit there, and you've watched a lot of anime.
I've met with a lot of heads of companies there, and I've met.
Yeah, if you were working with the Japanese government on pronatalist policy, where would you take things? Because I would say the solution that works best for the United States, say, or France or Germany, very different from what I think would work in Japan.
I've got a solution for Japan.
Yeah,
I've got a solution. I think what Japan needs to do is, if you look at like latent parts of Japanese culture, which make it unique when contrasted with other culture, pronatalist animes do well in Japan. A lot of people act like Spy Wars has been like pushed by the Japanese government. No, not Spy Wars. What's the word I'm saying? Spy
Grandpa
Family.
Spy Family. Yeah.
Spy,
but I thought Grandpa and Grandma turned young again. That felt
That's
blatant.
a good anime, but it's not like super famous. Like Spy Family is like One Piece level famous now in
Japan.
Japan.
Wow. That's good.
Like on every billboard. It's like I go to Walmart in the US and it's a quarter of the manga. And it's a very pronatalist. It's like about the joys of being a family, basically. And then it tries to spice it up a little, but that's the core idea of it, wholesome family. I think that the market in Japan loves wholesome family. The other thing that goes really popular in Japan is animes that are about how awesome the Japanese military is. God, a great one I want to say is Something Portal. I'll put a clip from it here, but I love it as well, where they open a portal to the like a fantasy world in the middle of Tokyo, and then the Japanese military goes in and starts like cleaning up elves and dragons and stuff like that, you know, because of course they would. And they get to like nerd out about all the weapons. And I don't feel that Japan has ever lost its order focused, imperialist focused identity at its core among my like Japanese friends who are really patriotic. I think that Japan needs to combine the wholesomeness that it has at the core of its culture with the militarism and imperialism that it had historically to build, I'd say, almost a militarized iteration of pronatalism, maybe something like units that are dedicated to cultural, basically build an infrastructure for cultural warriors to and protect the culture, to meet with other people, to dress in little uniforms. These are things that Japanese people love, okay? To have their kids dress in, you know, uniforms, go to events, maybe create like scouts, but make it a bit more military, make it a bit more ordered, get the parents more involved and more focused on the number of kids you can have, getting you specific badges, military awards for parents who have a certain number of kids. I think that's the direction Japan needs to go if it's going to hyper ignite the existing Japanese cultural core. And people like me are like, well, that's not going to work for everyone in Japan. Yeah, but it'll work for the most Japanese people in Japan. And I think it would do a good job of creating one of the unique cultural solutions that might make it through the Valley of the Lotus Eaters. But what is your thought, Simone?
No, I'm actually digging that a lot. Yeah, I think going, I would say a part of it, culturally speaking, would be to make it feel like they're going back to tradition, but really they're switching out an improved version of tradition with the context of modern technology and greater gender equality, but make it seem very traditional.
Well,
kind of like what we're doing with techno-Puritanism.
Not focus on it being tradition, but to focus on it being pro-Japanese. And I think that this
sort of, yeah. Well, but what I'm saying is I'm thinking about, for example, office culture in Japan. I'm thinking about how marriage is treated in Japan. And there is a much more, the issues they're dealing with are not as toxic as the intergender issues that we're seeing in South Korea, for example. But there is some mismatch, and there are different expectations between men and women that I don't think you can just say, okay, well, now we're going to completely ignore them and they don't exist anymore. La, 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 la. Instead, you have to lean into them, but redirect in a way that makes it productive.
That's what I mean is you make it something like a man's, like in one of these units, duty to treat women with, I'd say, honor, not i.e. I'm going to be like a simp for women like Western feminism, but like an extremified version of manners in terms of women in the workplace and bringing women into the workplace. And I think that this, in the same way that Abe was like, oh, well, you know, it is actually conservative to want to promote women because, you know, it helps Japan, it helps our economy, it helps our nation, right? To have these organizations not focused on old ways, and Japan has actually been very good at modernizing historically while maintaining its unique identity. I mean, look at anime, right? Like, is anything more modernized but culturally unique? And so one of the things that I think that they need to fight against is the stogie, we have to keep things the way they were, people, i.e. whether it's gender roles or things like in Japan now, they still do like whale meat in school because people are like, it's our culture, you can't take it out, which is just horrible. Like, they should not be doing this. And so I think that fighting against inefficiencies for the goal of preserving into or until we become an intergalactic civilization, Japanese culture, to ensure that they are one of the cultures that are part of this alliance. And I also think turning Japanese culture, if you want to make this easier to fight for, into a unique cultural avatar within the ecosystem we're going into, but a cultural avatar that is pluralistic. I think that when I say pluralistic, what I mean is they are fighting to preserve an advanced Japan, i.e. for Japanese people in the Japanese island and no one else within that environment, but alongside people like the Americans, alongside people like the Koreans. When they can build into their honor system protecting global pluralism as one of their duties, which is something that America did a fairly good job of historically. It's not like it doesn't work. I think that can do a very good job in terms of this redirection.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do have this hopeful feeling that Japan can pull through, but I don't know how delusional that is.
I think of the East Asian countries, it's by far the most likely to pull through because they have the best fertility rates right now. And this all happened to it earlier. Like, it basically went into the collapse that China hasn't even gone into yet, a few decades ago. And it got to deal with that before things got as bad as they are right now. So that's one reason why Japan's in a really strong position. The other reason is that they've been a very, very successful cultural exporter, which is, in the grand scheme of things, going to earn them a lot of friends that want them to pull through, and friends in high places, specifically their cultural export. So this is what makes Japan as a cultural exporter very different from Korea as a cultural exporter. So Korea has been as successful as Japan as a cultural exporter.
Yeah.
But Korea has disproportionately hit, well, basically dumb commie high school girls in the US. And it's disproportionately hit countries where American media is partially banned, like Pakistan, like a lot of countries in Africa, like a lot of the Middle East. I think Iran has a lot of Korean stuff.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Korea does really well in Islamic countries that partially ban US media. So they've done really well in these environments, but none of these people really matter. Japan, on the other hand, if you, for example, were to take a polling of the people who work to develop things like OpenAI's model and Anthropic's model and ask how many of them are big anime fans, I bet the number is 90, maybe even like 95%.
Oh, no, there's a lot of bro-ish people in Silicon Valley now, but
yeah,
it's high. It's higher
at those companies. Sorry,
yeah,
you have friends who work at these companies, right? Like, you remember from the events, like, these are not Silicon Valley bro people. These are Silicon Valley nerd people.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Anyway, I love you to death, Simone. This has been a fun conversation. And I think Japan can pull through. We've actually looked at holding a conference in Japan tied to pronatalism that's going to focus on like the US, Japanese, and maybe the rest of the Quad Alliance in the ways that they are fighting fertility collapse. Mostly just to dunk on China, because I think it can create a lot of good press, and China will get very angry when we talk about, okay, what are we going to do with China when they're no longer here? You know, maybe have a picture on the screen with like a divided map of a depopulated China, like the Paris Accord. What you think that's too much?
It caused major diplomatic incidents. Like, so much for us hosting that conference. But I would.
That's my goal. That's my goal, to get people for, because I think that would get a lot of Americans excited. When you could turn this into a national defense issue and a patriotic issue, I think that's when a lot of people are like, hell yeah, hell yeah.
I could see it, yeah. Well, you know, I honestly could see pronatalism becoming the new space race. Once demographic collapse really starts to hit in, it's kind of the national signal of
I like that. We might want to do a whole episode on this, the pronatalist space race.
There's something there. Because I know how much the space race, and especially this whole Russia-US thing, really captured the public imagination. And I feel like this is one of those things that would be even more powerful because every individual family could be involved. It's a whole I'm doing my part thing. It could be pretty great.
I love that. I love you. Have a good day, Simone.
Bye-bye. By the way, am I making you pizza tonight or what?
Oh, yeah. Do I have any meat left? I guess pizza.
So I can get from the freezer and quickly thaw out one smaller packet of.
I'm actually kind of in the mood for pizza.
Yeah, I feel like the kids are in the mood for pizza, so pizza it is. Pizza Friday. Yeah. All right. Oh,
yeah. Just like Malcolm Collins' meme. I don't have any prenatal.
And
hold on, I'm sending you some stuff on WhatsApp.
Looks like, oh, you have a bunch of your curtains down, don't you? Let's see if I do Alexa, first plug on. Somehow, maybe a little. Maybe if I don't know. It's a little chilly, you see.
I'm sorry you feel that way.
Oh, are you kidding me? The cold, our children. I love the cold. Titan, when I make her shower warm, not hot, mind you, warm, she says, too hot. And then she insists that I give her like what I would consider cold shower.
A cold shower. Yeah, all of our kids. And I love the news. It's like, they deprive them of even the warmth and the, I'm like, no. And this is why I'm about to go on a sci-fi podcast. So to talk about sci-fi, Frostpunk is the genre, is the post-collapse world I most want to wake up in.
As long as you're well-dressed, as one of our friends would say to us, there's no such thing as being cold. There's just being poorly dressed. So just bundle up, I guess.
I'm writing.
Speaking of being dressed, everyone makes fun of our glasses, Malcolm. Cutler and Gross, who makes these glasses, they had 2 actors in the Kingsman Secret Service wearing Cutler and Gross glasses.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, Colin Firth's character, and then also Samuel L. Jackson's character were wearing Cutler and Gross glasses because they're awesome.
So we are going to start with go down to the first of the.
Sorry, I'm looking. I just saw like the latest meme that you said. You just sent me like a wall of memes.
And go down to the